Donald Duck Goes Camping. Yippee! Huey, Dewey, and Louie cried, as they had just found out that their uncle, Donald Duck, was taking them camping. Donald and his nephews began to load the gear into the car. "I've got the tent and the food," Donald said. "Here's the fishing poles," Huey said. "Don't forget the sleeping bags," Louie reminded them. "I'm bringing a camping guidebook," said Dewey. "There's all kinds of great information in here about wildlife. You never know, we might need it." "You don't need a guidebook," Donald said confidently. "I know everything there is about camping." Donald and his nephews hopped into the car and headed toward the forest. A couple hours later, they arrived in the woods and found a camping spot. Huey, Dewey, and Louie helped their uncle put up the tent while Dewey read the guidebook. When they were finished setting up the tent, they put their food inside a wooden locker to keep away from the wild animals. "The guidebook says to hang the food locker from a tree," said Dewey. "It says bears will eat almost anything." "I already told you I know everything there is to know about camping," Donald said. "Animals aren't going to take food from me." Just then, 2 squirrels scampered down from the big oak tree and snatched a bag of peanuts. "Hey!" Donald shouted as the squirrels scurried back up the tree. "Come back here!" "The guidebook says it's good to share with little animals," said Louie, "but we shouldn't try to share with bears." "I don't care what the book says. Those are my peanuts," replied Donald. He grabbed an axe from the camping supplies. With all his might, Donald swung the axe toward the base of the tree. Crack! He chopped a large hole in the tree trunk, and a stream of acorns spilled to the ground. That's not very nice. "Why did you do that, Uncle Donald?" asked Dewey. "You spilled the squirrel's supply of acorns for the winter." "They stole my peanuts," said Donald angrily. The squirrels glared at Donald Duck and then darted away. Donald chuckled. "What silly little animals." A little while later, Huey looked up from his camping book. "Uh-oh," he said, pointing to the woods. A large bear was charging towards them. "Run!" Donald shouted. He and his nephews scrambled up some nearby trees. The bear came to a stop. He had spotted a picnic table and began to sniff at the food locker. The 2 squirrels had arrived with the bear, and they sat on a bench overlooking the campsite. With one big swipe of his paw, the bear broke open the food locker. Then he took a baked ham and left. Who takes a baked ham on a camping trip? "The guidebook was right," said Huey. "We should have hung the locker from a tree." Donald climbed down to the ground. "He didn't need a book. I don't need a book to tell me what to do," he said, annoyed. The 2 squirrels ran along the tree branches and chattered up at Donald again. This time they seemed to be laughing at him. "I'll get even with you," Donald yelled, as he climbed towards a squirrel. Just as he was about to grab them, they leaped onto a thin branch that was high above the river. "I've got you now," said Donald. He crawled out onto the branch. "Uncle Donald!" Dewey shouted. "The book says to stay off small branches." Crack! Suddenly the branch broke, and Donald fell into the river. The water swiftly carried him downstream. His nephews ran alongside him. Soon they heard the thundering sound of a waterfall. "Help!" Donald cried. "Pull me out!" He tried to swim toward the riverbank, but the current was too strong. Up in the trees, the squirrels chattered gleefully. "Shame on you," Louie scolded the squirrels. "How would you feel if your uncle was headed toward a waterfall?" The squirrels stopped laughing and darted into the underbush. In the river, Donald spotted a big rock and grabbed onto it. "Do something," he called to his nephews. "Anything! Look in the guidebook!" Huey, Dewey, and Louie started flipping through the camping guide, searching for a way to help their uncle. They only looked up when the squirrels returned with a brown beaver. The beaver waddled over to the tree and stood beside the river and began to gnaw at it. "What's he doing?" asked Louie. "He's trying to help," Dewey replied. "If the tree falls to the river, it might be long enough to reach Uncle Donald. Please hurry." A few minutes later, the tree fell over with a crash and landed next to the rock that Donald was clinging to. Donald crept along the tree trunk towards the dry land. Soon he was safely ashore. Huey, Dewey, and Louie gave him a big hug. "You made it!" Dewey exclaimed. "Were you scared?" Louie asked. "Don't worry, Uncle Donald," Huey said. "I would have thought of something." Donald didn't answer. Instead, he ran towards his car. "Where are you going?" his nephews called. "Aren't you going to thank the animals who rescued you?" Donald just hopped in the car and sped away. Huey, Dewey, and Louie looked at each other and shrugged. Donald returned in an hour. His car was filled with presents for the animals who had helped him. He had nuts for the squirrels, branches for the beaver, and a big bag of seed for the birds. The animals were delighted and began to munch on their treats. Donald also had a sack of cement and a towel. "What's that for?" Louie asked. "You'll see," said Donald. He mixed the cement into a thick paste and spread it with a trowel over the hole in the squirrel's big oak tree. Donald's nephew watched him patch the hole. "Do you really know how to fix trees?" asked Huey. "I do now," Donald said sheepishly. "I read all about it in the camping guidebook. You can learn a lot from books, you know." The end.